welcome to the stage Manon Ouimet, Jacob Perlmutter, and the incredibly brave and the subjects of the film, Maggie Barra and Joel Meyerowitz. So firstly, I guess I kind of wanted to start with Maggie and Joel and ask you what it feels like to be in an auditorium where people have seen your most intimate year revealed on the big screen. How does it feel to sit with everybody after this experience?
Well, we was here actually when you were all watching it, but we did hear a nice smattering of applause. Yes, you hear me okay? And you're still all here. It doesn't look like anybody left. So it feels, we've now been to a few screenings and Q&As, and the thing that moves all of us, not just Joel and myself, but all four of us, is how intimate audiences are and how open and courageous audiences are in sharing questions and stories about themselves. So I would say, I don't know about you, Joel, but I would say that it's a privilege every time to feel that a little bit of who we are is going out into the world and maybe having some nice effect.
I love being in public. It's so much fun. And really, I do it for the fun and for learning something from you all and from our interaction too. So I think it's a great thing. And it's so courageous of you to be willing to sit here with us and maybe even ask some questions.
And Jacob and Manon, what inspired you to approach this wonderful couple for this amazing documentary? And what was the whole concept behind the film in the first instance? Can you tell us a little bit more about that process?
Move back so that we can all see each other. This whole project came about from a chance encounter. I have been a big fan of Joel's photography for many years and was thrilled to see him on the streets of London one day and wanted to go and say something to this artist hero, but didn't know what to say, couldn't really pluck up the courage. So I followed Joel for a while into a shop and out of a couple of shops and took some time to really gather my words, and then I lost him. And I was gutted, but I thought, well, at least it was a sighting. And then a couple of weeks later, as fate would have it, I saw Joel again, but this time with Maggie. And I thought, I've got to go and say something and meet Joel. And I met Joel and it was wonderful. But then Joel introduced me to Maggie. And when I saw them side by side, they seemed to have this incredible aura about them. And seeing, this older couple and the love that they had for each other and the kind of respect that they had, the impression of meeting them went in really deep. And a couple of years went by, and during the pandemic, I came across Maggie's wonderful essays, which are on her website, maggiebarrett.com, and found her writing open and moving and kind of direct. And so I got in touch and said, how do you feel about making a documentary about your relationship? I remember meeting you on the streets and this impression hasn't ever gone away. And then Manon and I, who are a couple, started talking about how would this be for us as one artist couple to make a film about another artist couple. And the four of us met up and the shape just worked and we hit it off. And so there was no direct intention. It was rather just a case of pulling on the thread and seeing, because it just felt right, just riding on that feeling. And a couple of months later, Maggie and Joel opened not only their hearts, but also their house. And we stayed with them for the year of filming. So it was a very sort of natural, open experience that was very intimate.
And how did that conversation come about for you to obviously receiving this kind of offer of being filmed for a year by these filmmakers? How did you come to saying yes? What was your reason?
Well, I got the email And it doesn't usually happen that way, as you can see from the film. An email would normally go to Joel. So the fact that somebody was seeing me as an equal right off the get-go made it an automatic yes for me. And then obviously I shared the email with Joel, and we were sort of like, well, let's Zoom with them and see. That could be fun. And in fact, it was most of the time. And I don't mean that it wasn't fun with them all the time. It was always amazing with them. But as you can see in the film, there were hard moments that we all lived through. We all had lives that were going on off camera too. So it was just easy to say yes. What I always say is that actually we all fell in love with each other.
I'm still in love with you. Well, I've been fortunate to be asked a number of times to have a film made about me, and I haven't always said yes, because in my interaction with a potential filmmaker, I felt either inauthenticity or a lack of experience or some fixed idea about what was in the works. But it wasn't so with Manon and Jacob. It was an open-hearted interaction between four people, and we're, after all, more than 40 years apart. But the quality of our conversations was so ageless. We just talked about things, and we felt a kind of communication that was so inviting that there were no obstacles in opening ourselves up to being with them and sharing what this collaboration would come about and look like.
I think it also had to do with the fact that Jacob and I hadn't made a documentary before. We had no expectations. We didn't anticipate what was going to happen. We just were curious to see what these two people, what their lives were like and how they shared their time and their creativity and how they were and are so vivacious and in love. So it came from a place of curiosity, not with a desire to make and create. It was just to explore. And with that, I think we were able to, there were no boundaries. The trust was immediately there from the get-go of us meeting.
Absolutely.
And from your perspective, were there things that you learnt as a couple, a filmmaking couple and, a young couple? Was there so much that you learnt from this older and more established couple? What were the highlights?
I mean, so much. I think for me, it was, my intent, the reason why I wanted to be a part of this project was because I don't have so many role models of people who are in love late in life. And it was an opportunity to see what that could look like for me and Jacob as a couple and project into the future. What I'd learned from Maggie and Joel was this endlessness to life. There is no point of, there's always room for growth in a relationship, in yourself, in the way that you communicate, in having new friendships, like with us. So there's like this endlessness to it. There isn't an end point where you retire from life. You continue to grow. And that gave me a lot of freedom and hope for the future. And yeah, I'm very grateful for that lesson.
And likewise, did you two learn a lot from this couple as they kind of lived your everyday life in Tuscany and beyond?
Well, one of the things that I actually envied about this couple right from the start was that they had found each other so young. It took me a long time to get it right and to choose the right partner. So I really admired the way that they communicated with each other. There was a respect that they had for each other, and a kind of equality that struck me as very, very beautiful. And I would say to Joel many times during the course of that year that I wished that I had been as evolved at their age as they are. So yeah, I learned a lot. I also learned, thanks to both of them, to believe in myself more and to stand up for myself. So.
And I think we all witnessed that, of course, in the film, which was quite an incredible moment. What's it like for you to see that scene in particular, but I suppose the less beautiful moments in your relationship? I'd love to know a bit more about how that felt for both of you, seeing it for the first time.
It was a whole year of life, and all of us have certain years in our lives where a lot of things happen, right? They just seem more loaded than other years, and that year was a very intense year anyway. But to see it a year condensed into an hour and a half is really quite something. And of course, the wonderful thing about the way this couple work is that they weren't afraid to bring out the not so wonderful aspects of a marriage. So for me, what I saw, it wasn't that I saw something about myself that I didn't know. What I saw was how ingrained certain things were becoming in myself. For instance, a certain kind of resentment um, that just was quite shocking to me at how deep it was in me. And I really didn't like it. And I could see how if I didn't do some work on that, that I could end up being, a bitter old lady. So I would have to say that the film was really enlightening for me in that way. And I'm glad to say that a lot of that resentment has certainly eased. I'm not in that. That was 3 years ago now, which seems ridiculous, doesn't it? It's like yesterday. So we have kept growing, and we're not actually exactly those people that you saw on the screen tonight. I mean, we still have all the same shit. It's just that it's processed much quicker and is probably in the Thames by now.
I'll take a go at that too. I think what Maggie said about seeing oneself revealed in a way that you don't necessarily see yourself most of the time happened for me too. I began to understand more how impactful it was for Maggie to be living in the apartment that I raised my kids in, even though we remade the place to suit us. Nonetheless, we were all living with my active archive and studio behind a set of sliding doors. And I hadn't understood how intrusive that really was. It was a big space, a big New York apartment, and I guess I assumed that it was fluid and flexible and we had a private living space. But in the film, I could see clearly how voices from the studio were constantly filtering into the space and how encroaching it was on your privacy. I just was floating back and forth all the time between them. And that scene, a friend of ours called it Maggie's aria. And I realized that you were telling me, really telling me, in lots of levels, but when I saw it, how somehow unconscious I could become, and that you had real needs, and for someone who's sensitive most of the time and who's supportive and loves you, I could also be distracted and cut off in some ways, and so there's a lot to learn. And I also could see some of my father's behavior, and oftentimes you look in the mirror as you're getting older, and sometimes you see little flashes of your parents or your future. And I think I saw something about my pop's behavior, and I realized I should make every effort I can to change while there's still time. And there is time, because aging doesn't necessarily have a flip of a calendar on it. It's timeless. It's all sliding by, continuously. And I really feel that the film gave me a fresh look at myself, because they made 243 hours of films. And how many movies are in there hidden away?
The sequel comes out next year.
but they were able to pull out this line of thinking and reflection upon who we are. And that has certainly educated both of us. And we thank you endlessly for it.
And we didn't have to pay them.
Almost free therapy for you. Yeah. And what about for you, Jacob and were there any kind of reflections that you had about your own parents and family experiences? It sounds like you almost had a family of your own, the four of you. So what did it make you think about kind of your own experiences as a child?
Mum and Dad are here.
It was good. Yeah. I was fortunate to grow up in a communicative and loving household, and one whereby emotions could be talked about and sort of processed freely without fear of repercussion. And I felt very familiar watching Maggie and Joel's dynamic, actually seeing that that it's okay to have emotions and it's okay to fearlessly express them, because if the other person understands and loves you in the right way, then they will accommodate you in the way that they can hold you in that moment. And so, and as everyone has said, there's a kind of constant need to grow, because also we are never complete. Every day or every moment, we're arriving at a new version of ourselves, and parts of ourselves are being left behind and new parts are being taken on. And so how do you grow yourself whilst growing in a relationship and in a partnership as well, as these two separate entities but also a combined kind of organism? And so I think I felt comfortable and safe being with Maggie and Joel, and their sort of model of communication felt familiar and good to me. Yeah, and I think also for us, for Manon and I, it's different with your own parents, because there is always going to be some odd baggage that you weirdly handle. But when you're sort of looking at a new couple and a new relationship who are, new to us, we were able to project ourselves into the future and sort of hypothesize what we might look like down the line, and to pin our own ideologies and expectations onto the way that Maggie and Joel communicate with each other and the way that they love each other. And so that sense of projection also felt, it sounds a bit sci-fi talking about it, but also, I don't know, it's a kind of form of relating, a kind of mirror.
Of course.
Yeah.
And did that make it more challenging as time went on to bear witness but not be too involved in your subjects' lives? Obviously, being a documentary maker is all about kind of containing the boundary. Did that become more and more difficult? I'm particularly think about Maggie's devastating injury and how challenging that must have been to see. Can you share a bit more about what that experience is like for you?
Gosh, it's such an interesting question, that it was such a fluid relationship in the way that we turned up for one another, whether we were with cameras or without cameras. Most days we would start by miking these two up, and then the cameras would roll on and off throughout the day. But we ended each day together. We sat and had breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We shared all our meals, so we were always sharing in the emotional aspects of our lives and processing what had been spoken about before, or what had happened in the day, or what had happened the week before, or what was going to happen in the future. So there was always this fluid conversation and emotional support that we offered each other. I don't know if it became more harder as time went on. I think it was always the same, because we were just in it from the beginning.
And Maggie, from your perspective, were there any challenges as you were entering into this filming process, having been an esteemed therapist? Obviously, in our training, it's about potentially withholding the full self. Were there any considerations about how much you were prepared to reveal in this film?
No, well, first of all, I was no longer a practicing therapist. So that it may have been different if I had been. So I didn't have that concern about revealing myself. I felt right from the beginning that if we were going to do this, it just had to be really honest and open. So there was nowhere that I wasn't willing to go. I just was along for the ride, and we were living our lives. And Manon is talking about how we had our breakfast, lunch, and dinner together. But it wasn't just that we ate meals together. We did the shopping together. We did each other's laundry. I folded their undies. So when you are establishing that when you're growing that kind of relationship, and it's just founded on so much trust and respect, nothing is daunting. There was, when I had this injury, I think for a moment, these two thought, oh well, that's it, that's over, and I'm like, what, are you kidding? Here's some real drama. Let's turn this into a feature film.
I'd like to add something. In the evenings after filming was done and we were preparing dinner together, after that, conversation would just naturally happen. And we'd reflect on the course of the day or the meanings of certain things that came out or the surprises that came up for all of us. And so there was a kind of interlocking experience of expression. And I think that it really nourished the film in terms of an openness and fluidity and conversational characteristic between all of us. Nothing was held back. There weren't any secrets that we decided we're not going to talk about this. Everything was open. And it was so joyous, and the experience was so deep that it just was ongoing. And I think that when you have something like that, it is such a treasure to have a trusted conversational experience between four people, that something grows out of that. And, that was the joy of this whole experience. People have asked us before, well, what did you get out of this experience of a year? And really, it was the pleasure. Yeah, it was the pleasure of being together and just going on this ride. And we've been on a ride for a long time. 15 years ago, we left New York City to spend a year in Europe. And it just, every day after that year, it was, okay, well, one more day, right? We'll see how today goes. And it's turned into 15 years. So we ran away from home, We joined our own circus.
Were there any moments, I suppose that this kind of negates the question actually, but were there any moments that you decided not to include in the film that were maybe not because they were too personal, but they just didn't fit with the narrative? Or was it really just a free-flowing decision to include the 1 hour and 40 minutes that you showed?
There's lots of stuff, of course, that we could have included, but I think that it took a year to edit this film, and it took us and two great editors to edit this film, and also a really amazing co-production team and supervising editor. And the reason I'm listing all of those people is because to make something that is so layered and hopefully comprehensive and entertaining and makes sense whilst also having its own particular language is really tough. And the people that we collaborated with on the edit were of all ages. We're in our 30s. There were people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. And once we had established what the core themes of the film were and the ways that they kind of knitted together, you're using scraps of reality, trying to fit together a comprehensive story where these themes grow and interlock, and the ways that they step on each other, and how that sort of how they relate to each other to form this kind of portrait of this couple and two individuals as well. So you have this crazy board with images pinned to it and all sorts of notes and ideas, and eventually things fit together and you're looking to sift out stuff that doubles up. And we had to let go of some things that were painful to let go of, but ultimately we're trying to sculpt something that is singularly comprehensive and emotional. And it's a wild task, but it's funny, you will never see any other version. And it feels so natural now when we watch this and you've spent a bit of time away from the edit. There's this kind of feeling of inevitability, like, oh, this is what it always should have been. And that's also the beauty of working on any, work of art, is that the finished result is something that is so kind of pure. But boy, is it wild getting there.
And also just the wonderful challenge of making something that is true to Maggie and Joel's experience of that year, that they could stand behind and authentically say, yes, that was my experience of the year. And that was a challenge, but a wonderful one, and one that Jacob and I, at the end of each edit day, would leave the edit room and ask ourselves, was that Maggie and Joel? What we just created this day, was that them? And if it didn't feel like them, then we'd go in the next day and tear it all apart and start again. And that was a really important process, was to make something that was true to you two. And Maggie and Joel didn't see any of the rushes, any of the footage, until a week before we did final cut. And you guys didn't have any notes.
And Maggie, I wanted to know what it was like for you, thinking about some of these pivotal moments. Obviously, the turning point in the film's narrative is obviously following your accident, and hearing that you weren't watching rushes or dailies on this. What was that experience like, to see the assembled film, something that was so visceral for you and for you as a couple? What was that like to see on camera for the first time?
Well, actually, something interesting happened for me that first time. I was aware of all the footage that they shot, even though I may not have remembered it all. But I had no idea that when I had the accident, I don't know why I didn't think that he obviously would have shot me on the ground, writhing in pain. So I didn't know until I saw that on the screen that was in the film. And I had a very visceral reaction to that, as though the accident had just happened all over again. And literally had vertigo for 24 hours and couldn't move. So that was rather shocking. But I came away from that first viewing, first of all, in awe of what they had put together, because 243 hours down to 100 minutes, that's huge. And they were true to us. There was nothing there that made me cringe. There was nothing that I thought, wow, I didn't. There were no surprises, actually, except for, thank you, Joel, the accident.
Just a sec. Let me be clear here. I was tending to Maggie until the ambulance arrived and pushed us all out of the way. And it was at that moment that I thought, I better film this. Nobody else is here to do this. And so, thankfully, that little snippet is in the film.
Yeah. Well,
And it was quite discreet, actually, because actually it's a sound clip that we hear first, and it's such a switch from the beauty of the opening kind of third of that film. But yeah, it was just such an impactful experience. And I guess likewise, what did it feel like to see the the kind of Maggie aria that took place as well? What was that experience like for you?
Humbling. I mean, you could see I'm not actually in the frame physically. I'm a reflection of myself, because they had snuck into the hallway outside the room and set the camera up when this was ongoing. And even though I pathetically tried to defend myself a few times, and we heard the story from the editor who was working with Jacob and Manon. He said every time he would see that scene come on, he would say, "Joel, don't say it. Don't." He said over and over again. And that's how I felt too. But what can I say? We survive it, and we could still laugh about it, and we learned from it. So it was really generous.
And what are the main things that you have learnt from this experience, from being able to watch yourself in such intimate form? What are the main takeaways for you?
I'm pausing for a second as I try to grasp them. Oh, I think personally, intimately, I see certain tropes that I rely on, and that I don't need to rely on those tropes any longer. You can outgrow your um, your defenses. Yeah, thank you. You kind of outgrow your defenses and just relax into it. And I would say in 90% of our lives together, we communicate smoothly and clearly and fully and honestly. Honesty being the thing that we learned together early on. I have to say that you brought into our relationship a kind of directness, because I hadn't experienced that in my first marriage. It was shielded in ways that seemed to be, I don't know, impossible to get through. But with Maggie, there's um, no holding on to any kind of a grudge or a negative feeling. Things are expressed, and we move on through that. And so I think that really everything I've learned from Maggie, and compounded by this film, offers an option to continue to recreate myself. We're all in the process of recreation. So, what about you?
Well, I think I said it before. I think I saw the things in myself that that I didn't want to live with for the rest of my life. You know, basically just that. And it's not that those things, once you have that revelation, just automatically go away. I mean, it's work, isn't it? You know, there's always the next layer to work on. But just seeing it and realizing that I had a choice to make as to whether that's the place that I wanted to stay in, or whether I wanted to start letting go. So yeah, it was really, really a very learning experience for me.
And for you, Jacob and Manon, what are your takeaways from this whole project?
I think I sort of touched on it before about there being there's always space for growth, but I actually wanted to touch on something about the confrontation scene about with Maggie and Joel. It meant a lot to me. It was it's not very often that you get to see an argument that close and intensely, and to see one that had a resolution with humor and love was so important to me, and has had such an impact on my life and on probably our relationship, in the way that I can create space for anger, which I don't think I didn't have that in me before. So
Wow.
Well, we've talked a lot about relationships, but another big takeaway for me, for both of us, that we've sort of talked about ourselves, is that we live in a world that is so focused on making it by a certain age, and this strange, just propulsion to making it by sometime in your life, or else you're meaningless in some way. Well, I don't know about other professions, but in the arts world, there's this kind of perverse image of that, and it's so not the case. And if you love what you do and you're in it for the long run, then the riches kind of keep coming for decades. And Maggie and Joel have a kind of perennial commitment to what they do as a daily practice, and that's really meaningful, sort of casting our minds ahead, and that there is no rush. And the joy of making this project in particular, as our first feature film, and as a joint collaboration, was that we were just in the project fully, and we didn't know what was going to be next, and it didn't matter. We were just in that and that is mindful and so important in such a fast-paced world, is to just slow down, focus on what you're doing, let the process envelop you, get everything that you can from it, and then if you're still alive at the end, I don't know, have a sleep or something, you know.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to answer these questions. And obviously, as we talked about, I'd really love to open some questions up to the audience. I know that there'll be some questions. So would anyone like to start?
Hi, everyone. Such a beautiful documentary. Thank you for sharing it with us and your story. The question I was going to ask was initially going to be directed to the two of you, Joel and Maggie, but actually, after watching it and now meeting the two of you, I'd actually like all of you to answer it. How did you, how did you introduce this idea to your families, to your parents? You would have been quite young at the time when you decided to do it, and to the two of you and your children. How did they take it? Were they?
They said no. Our children said no, thank you. Right off the bat, they wanted absolutely nothing to do with it, which was quite painful, actually, because they're a big part of our lives. But I also understand it. I mean, they've had to work hard at carving out their own identities. And I think that when you've got, pretty big personalities for parents, that's a job in and of itself. And in a way, I think they did us a favor by saying no. And I really liked their courage and their honesty around that. They've all seen the film. They were at the screenings in the film festival in New York, and they were very supportive and loving, and they think that it's a really fine film. And I particularly was appreciative of Joel's daughter, who I have a very close relationship with, but I also know she's very protective of her papa. And I was wondering how she would take the confrontation scene. I expected to hear from her. And I did. She came up to me and she said, "You go for it, girl." Oh, and his brother came up to me and said he had it coming.
Mine is not a very long answer. My parents said, "Yeah, sure. What's next?" I mean, they knew that we were embarking on what was this kind of exciting, unknown project. This project was also started right at the tail end of the pandemic, and I think just the joy of being with other people and new people. There was an invisible boost to the whole experience that gave a kind of meaning that obviously everyone experienced in your own ways, kind of post-pandemic, how to relate again.
Hello, congratulations all of you on such a powerful and beautiful film. So I have two questions for one question for each couple, so I'll be as brief as I can. So firstly to Jacob and Manon, I was really curious because you said that you were so moved by this older couple who were deeply in love with each other. And I just wondered at the very beginning, since the drama unfolded across their lives, across the year, how did you think the film might be before it started? Shall I ask the second question next? Just very briefly to both of you, to Maggie and Joel. I think we got a sense actually about Maggie, but maybe you'll tell me something different, that your creative work, to both of you, how was the process of being filmed? How did that affect your individual creative work? And it seemed, Maggie, that it was quite profoundly inspiring, and that your writing took a new dimension as a result of it. And I'd love to hear a bit about that. And also, Joel, I wondered how your own process was affected in the course of the year?
Do you want to start?
Sure. We didn't have any expectations of what the year was going to be, but we had thought maybe a seasonal shape. Maggie and Joe had created a book called Inside the Light, and it was about Tuscany and the seasonal changes there. And we saw it more of a meditation on a relationship about a creative couple, and that was the starting point. And it evolved very quickly because of Maggie and Joel's honesty and openness and their willingness to invite us into the intimate moments. And then we were able to see more of what the film could be and what themes were present in their lives. And, you know, we're creatures of habit. We say the same things over again. We do the same things over again. And it didn't take us long to realize what was happening in these two people's lives and what they were working through that could make something like this.
So for me, creatively, first of all, it was just really nice to be seen by a young couple. I think anybody who's over 50 likes to be seen by young people. It's very easy to feel, irrelevant. And as you can see from the film, I've struggled with the fact that I haven't been as successful out in the world as an artist as Joel has been. And that softened for me as a result of doing the film, partly because I had two people who were really validating me and egging me on. I mean, I think it was like maybe the second night that we were all together. They were all in the kitchen cooking or cleaning the dishes, and I sat at the piano and played, not even thinking about it, and saw these two heads snap around. Before you know it, there was recording equipment on the piano. It never occurred to me. And since the film, Jacob and I have been collaborating. We've just written a play that we're thrilled about. And Manon and Joel are working on a project. It also inspired me to get deeper into my visual art and to hold open studios and sell my work privately. So I feel actually now like a very successful artist, doing exactly what I want to be doing, the way I want to be doing it, and fuck everybody out there who thinks that they have a right to tell me if my work is valid or not.
I think success is an immeasurable quantity. Everybody has a different idea of what success is, and I think Maggie is a successful artist in that she makes music and she draws and paints and writes and dances and has a wide creative spectrum in her life. And the work that she makes is interesting or challenging or beautiful or touching. It has a dynamic to it. It isn't always about knowing how to get your work out there in exhibitions in galleries or published in books and stuff like that. I come from a father who was a salesman and a real schmoozer, and he could talk to a parking meter or in an elevator to everybody, and it just came naturally to me in my life as a photographer to just take the next step. And I was lucky. I started out at a time when photography was on its sort of mid-century rise, and I rose with it. Like tide lifts all boats, and so I was fortunate. And by the time I met Maggie, I had been photographing for almost 30 years. I had established something for myself. But congratulations to you for recognizing that you don't have to be famous out there. But to answer your question, you could see in the film that I'm always photographing. I mean, my camera's always on my shoulder wherever I go, whether I'm shopping or mowing the lawn. You never know what's going to happen. And so you see my work ethic there. But I think this has changed me as a number of things in later years, as one softens or expands, things come in and change you. And after I made the film about my father and after I worked inside 9/11, I felt much more open to doing work that has some social value. Because artists really are totally self-indulgent creatures who are doing it for their own understanding. It's not about anybody else, really. It's about how you interpret the potential of your medium and yourself as you try to find a union between you and it. And so uh, I feel that a year of being observed by Jacob and Manon has softened some edges for me, and it's allowed me to reconsider things about my own work that I had overlooked before. Vulnerable, youthful, playful, experimental things. And so I'm trying to use these later years of my life to go back and take a look at that early work, which was never really seen because nobody gave a shit about photography back in the 60s, really. And I'm trying to see if the person I was as a young man who discovered photography at 24 years old, if that through line from then to now has authenticity. I'm sort of looking back at all the different things. So you might say reflection has come about because of being a subject, in other people's eyes. Here I am now. So what am I going to do with it?
Thanks for a beautiful film, all of you. It's so wonderful. But my question is that I can see in all four of you as artists a kind of a devotion to and a commitment to a kind of exposing kind of honesty in some way. Like I see it in all of your work, and I just wonder if that relates and what you think is the value in that kind of unguardedness that you all seem to be pursuing in some way, something raw or something. I don't know.
Shall I go for it or do you want to go for it? Go for it, Jacob.
That's such an exciting question. And we've never been asked that, so thank you. I suppose for me, the root of being an artist is there are certain artists who have inspired me and who I live with in my brain. They don't know about it, apart from Joel and Maggie now. But they are people who are really important and influential, and I think that in whether it's music or writing or whatever or filmmaking, each of those people have pursued a version of truth, maybe through metaphor, but metaphor is such a powerful way of looking at the truth. And I think that so much of the human experience is about numbing the emotions and numbing especially the pain, and just looking for the party times and the good times because it kind of chemically feels good. But I think that the real beauty is in knowing that the human experience is the full spectrum from pain to love and everything in between. And I love it when artwork, when art's tentacles reach all sides of truth simultaneously. Because like if you shy away, because that's the reality that each human being faces, and shying away from it feels like a shame. So I think that art, really exciting art in any form, has the potential to strip back the veneer and reveal the reality. And I think it takes courage from the artist to do that. And I think it takes courage from the audience to bear themselves and feel that. And I know that first as an art lover, way before being an artist. And that to me always felt so exciting and scary and thrilling.
I agree with everything that Jacob said. And Jacob is approaching it from the creative angle. For me, you're talking about honesty, right? And you're talking about people revealing themselves, which has nothing to do with art. It has to do with you wanting to connect with other people in the truest way possible, because that's the only way we can feel like we belong. For me, honesty is the basis of everything, including saying the things that are hard to say sometimes, and knowing that sometimes the honesty that you reveal might be difficult for the other person to hear, but that you can also hold them in their hearing if you're being true to yourself. So for me, honesty is the foundation of being a loving, evolving human being. And then if you are fortunate enough to combine it with art, you maybe get to say something like we've said that actually goes out into the world and makes just a little difference here and there. So for me, honesty is everything.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today to this special Everyman in Therapy. It's been absolutely incredible to have you here, and thank you to the audience for your questions as well.
Thank you.